Hey guys, Mitch with Shock Therapy, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the Polaris RZR Pro R dual rate spring kit. This spring kit's going to do a couple of different things for you. Not only is it going to give you the added ground clearance that you're looking for, it's also going to really help smooth out the chop and chatter, the big rollers, big whoops, or even the big jump landings. This spring kit is made in the USA and carries a lifetime warranty. It is also going to take one set and one sag after the initial ride height setting. The factory springs do not take care of this, and they sag and fade over time even after multiple adjustments. This spring kit install is a little bit more in depth just to the difficulty of having to pull the front shocks off. So give yourself about 2 to 3 hours. Let's jump on in. I'm going to show you guys how to do it. On the front shocks of the Pro R, these are very tricky to get out of the car if you've never done them before. A trick that we found is if you get the lower shock bolts out, still have the upper one in, you jack the car up even more to where you have about 2-3 inches between the shock mount and the arm mount. That greatly helps you getting the shocks out of the front of these cars. Your first step in the installation is to jack the front of the vehicle up off the ground until both tires move freely. Next, install jack stands for added safety. You can now begin removing the driver's side front sway bar link to help in the ease of removing the shock. Make sure to unplug both of the electronic plugs that connect to the shock. Next, remove the lower shock bolt using a 21mm socket and a 21mm wrench. You can now remove the upper hardware using again a 21mm wrench and a 21mm socket. To help speed up the process, you can use an electric impact on the top shock mount. Remove the upper bolt. So on the front shocks of the Pro Rs, they are a little tricky to get out of the car. What we found with pulling them off a couple times is disconnecting the sway bar link helps greatly. And then when you get the upper and the lower bolt out, you can basically lower the shock, move the top of the shock towards the firewall, lift up on it. That'll allow you to kind of swoop it out backwards. We'll kind of show you how it's done. Remove the shock from the vehicle and place it into a spring compressor. Make sure that you lower the factory bump stop a couple of inches to remove the lower spring perch. Begin compressing the spring slowly and remove the lower spring perch. Next, remove the factory lower spring, followed by the factory divider and the factory upper spring. You can now begin setting your preload and crossover measurements. These measurements are going to be your starting point, and the preload is going to be set to 2 inches. Next, set your crossover measurement to 4 inches. You can now begin installing the new spring kit, starting with the upper spring, the factory divider, and then the lower spring, making sure that the spring numbers are upside down, also making sure that you clock both spring ends 180 degrees apart. Carefully compress the spring system and reinstall the factory lower spring perch, making sure that when you decompress the system, you do it carefully. Remove the shock from the spring compressor to begin installing it back into the vehicle in the same orientation that it was taken out. You can now install the factory upper bolt followed by the nut, making sure that you leave the hardware loose at this time. Make sure that you reinstall the shock connectors before installing the lower shock bolt. You can lower the vehicle with the jack to help in the ease of the installation of the lower shock bolt. Install the lower bolt followed by the nut on the back side. Reconnect the sway bar link and repeat these steps on the opposite side. With both front shocks installed, you can now remove the jack stands and lower the vehicle back onto the ground. Next, jack up the rear of the vehicle until both tires are off of the ground. Make sure that you use jack stands for added safety. You can now remove the factory lower hardware using a 21mm socket and 21mm wrench. Next, unplug the two shock connectors at the top of the shock and begin removing the upper shock hardware. It does help to use an electric impact to help speed up the process. With both shock bolts removed, you can now remove the rear shock from the vehicle and place it into a spring compressor. Make sure that you lower the factory bump stop a couple of inches to help with removal of the lower spring retainer. Slowly compress the springs, remove the lower retainer, followed by the lower spring, the factory divider, and the upper spring. Next, begin setting your starting point measurements for preload and crossover. Set your preload starting point measurement to 7.5 inches. Using a hammer and a mallet, break free the crossover rings and begin setting your starting point measurement at 11 inches. Install the new upper spring, followed by the factory divider, followed by the new lower spring, making sure that the ends of the springs are clocked 180 degrees apart. Carefully release the spring tension and begin removing the shock from the spring compressor to begin installing it back onto the vehicle. Starting with the upper hardware, insert the bolt followed by the nut on the backside. Make sure that you reconnect the two shock plugs at the top of the shock. Next, install the lower bolt followed by the nut on the backside. Make sure to leave all hardware loose at this time. Repeat these steps on the opposite side. both shocks reinstalled, you can now remove the jack stands and lower the vehicle back onto the ground. At this point, you're ready to begin the initial ride height process. Make sure to drive the vehicle back and forth a couple of times to settle the suspension. With the driver remaining in the vehicle, your starting point measurement in the front is going to be taken from the lower control arm tab closest to the firewall. Now take the rear measurement from the bottom of the frame where the radius rods meet the frame. With your ride height measurements achieved, you can now set the rear crossover gap at 2 inches from the bottom of the crossover to the top of the plastic divider. In the front, we are going to be measuring about a 1-inch gap from the bottom of the crossover to the top of the plastic divider. You can now begin locking down all of the factory hardware on the driver's side front shock. Make sure that you retighten the swaybar links, tightening the lower and the upper hardware, and repeat these steps on the opposite side. With the front hardware tightened and torqued, you can now tighten the driver's side rear shock hardware, making sure that you torque it, and repeat these steps on the opposite side. And your installation is complete. We hope that this video helped you guys with the installation of your spring kit at home. The most important thing that we recommend is after the first 200 to 400 miles, recheck your ride height as the springs have taken their initial set. Also, if you're adding or subtracting weight, we highly recommend that you're adjusting the ride height according to what you're doing with the vehicle. This in return is going to give you the best performance and overall ride quality that you guys are looking for. With a ton of hours put into the stock Pro R spring testing, we are very excited to announce the new spring kit for the Pro R Dynamics version. We're very confident that this spring kit's going to help you guys with the chop and chatter, the big bumps, big whoops, and give you guys the best performance that you guys are looking for out of the Pro R. This spring kit is tailored to you. It's also made in the USA and it backs a lifetime warranty. If you'd like to order this spring kit or any other products that we offer, feel free to visit the website at www.shocktherapyusa.com. For any technical help or assistance, feel free to reach out at 623-217-4959. If you guys like this video, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell to be notified anytime that we post a new video.